Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues. We are at Asso Holding headquarters in Rome, together with Jim Macnamara, distinguished professor of public communication at the University of Technology, Sydney, visiting professor at the London School of Economics and Political Science, and member of the International Advisory Board of the FERPI Lab. And Toni Muzi Falconi, past president of FERPI, founder and past chair of Global Alliance for Public Relations and Communication Management, and now chair of the International Advisory Board of FERPI. Today we are going to talk about artificial intelligence, public relations, and the intersection with communication, emotion, and other topics that are debated in those days. So I pass the ball to Toni to give his point of view about artificial intelligence and public relations.
Thank you, Biagio, and welcome to Rome, Jim. The topic I would like to start with this conversation is that of speed. In other words, we are in a situation today in which speed has completely overdone whatever we're doing in communication and public relations, and the speed with which we do it is much too fast, according to my opinion. Of course, other people don't agree, but maybe you don't agree yourself. But I think that we need, as communicators, as public relators, we need to think before we do, and that is always the case, even when they were slow. But that didn't happen often at that time. And now I think we need to slow down, because the things are overtaking, and the concepts are beyond our capacity of coping with them, and the natural issues with which we have to do on a common basis are much, much too quick for us to understand. So what do you think about this?
I think you raised some very good points, Tony. Like many complex issues in life, I think the answer is yes and no. Is technology and speed of communications going to slow down in our world? No. It's probably going to speed up further. I come from Australia, and it wasn't that long ago that to travel from Australia to here in Rome would have taken 8-10 weeks on a ship. I come across in less than 25 hours. And they tell me there'll be planes that'll bring me across in 10 hours at supersonic speeds within a few years. Telecommunications, those things will speed up. Where, Tony, I think you raise a really good point, is that we do have to have time for thinking and reflection. I do work with military and police commanders who deal with counterterrorism, deal with incidents, and they're in a situation where they have to make decisions in seconds. And one of the techniques they do, though, is they make decisions, but they also take time out. They put their hand up and say stop, and even find a quiet space and take time to think. And so I think as communication practitioners, we've got to adapt to and work with the speed of telecommunications, the speed of information around the world. But in our practice, I think we can, the way we manage ourselves as humans, we need to take time out for two reasons. And it may be 5 minutes, it may be an hour, it may be just reflecting at times. And I think we need to do it for two reasons. We need to do it to have good reflection and thinking, strategic thinking. We need to do it for mental health as well. If we continually operate in a high-pressure environment, we become tired, we become stressed, and we make worse decisions. And so there is an argument worldwide at the moment, particularly coming out of COVID, that mental health is an issue, and that the way to deal with that is, I think we have to operate at 100 miles an hour most of the time, but then you take moments out. And whether it's an hour, whether it's a few days, taking time out to reflect and think. So I think the answer is yes and no. A lot of things are not going to slow down, but there are times that we have to, and if you think of thinking fast, thinking slow, I think we need to do both.
Thank you, Jim. One point I would like to ask you to reflect on is that we tried, we merged our discipline, merged communication and relationships in the last 20, 30 years. They used to be completely separate once before, but they were merged together, and one can consider relationships or consider communication as exactly the same thing. Now, I wonder if that is still true today with the chat GPT. The point is that communication is traceable via chat GPT, but relationships are not, because relationships are simply, not simply everything but simply, but are complexly human, whereas communication is not necessarily human. Would you agree that we go back to a distinction between communication and relationships?
I'd like to introduce a third concept in there to clarify, and that is there's communication, there's relationships, and there's information. And we often confuse communication with information, and I think what you're talking about is information, because that's what ChatGPT collects and processes. Communication, if you go back to the original meaning of the term, it's about exchange of information. It's about people coming together and interacting. That's what it's more about, the sharing of meaning, than it is about transmitting. And I even say to my students, sending out messages is not communication, because we don't know whether anyone's receiving those messages, are they rejecting them? And so it's important to separate information. And with information, yes, information is not relationships. There's no question about it, because people can ignore it. Communication, though, exchange of information and sharing of ideas, is fundamental. And John Dewey very famously said, society is communication. You can't have society without communication. It's the glue that brings people together. So I think we are quite right in focusing on communication, and relationships flow on because communication facilitates relationships. Information doesn't. And I think we have to stop confusing information with communication. And a lot of public relations and advertising work and corporate communication is actually only sending out information. They don't know that the messages are arriving. They don't know that there is a relationship forming. And so I put information to the side, but I see communication. Whether it's between families or whether it's between organizations and their stakeholders, communication is the glue that binds them together.
Would you agree that the role of the public relations professional, whoever he or she may be, is that of getting people to do things or getting people to think things?
In public relations is not only about communication, because we have to manage budgets and do other things, but at the core of what public relations does and the core of what strategic and corporate communication do is about one of three things, really. We do it to inform, so we want to change awareness. We also do it to persuade. In some situations, it's during COVID-19, health organizations needed to persuade people to wear masks, vaccinate, and so forth. But the highest level of communication is about building relationships and interaction, sharing ideas. And so we need to understand that communication has an informing role, which is awareness related. It has a persuasion role, which is an attitude level. So when we turn to, and the root of this is behavioral and social science. I mean, at the end of the day, you could wrap all this together, and to me, I would rather study and see people study behavioral and social science than study any one of these particular disciplines. And then we clearly understand that we may be doing all three, or we may simply be informing, or we may be persuading, but also in many occasions we do need to be communicating to exchange and build relationships and change behavior.
One thing that has changed over the past months is the outbreak of artificial intelligence. And very recently, it's a very recent feature because it's only maybe a month or two which ChatGPT is out, and then beyond ChatGPT, there are a number of other elements which constitute the structure of artificial intelligence in our work. What is your opinion on these contraptions? I have tested ChatGPT, and I was very happy with what I received. The point is that these are not relationships. But I'm the only one who says so. The people who use ChatGPT today fake relationships with the ChatGPT. What is your point on that?
Well, we could talk for a long time about AI, artificial intelligence, and ChatGPT being a particular kind. But first of all, I think no AI or no ChatGPT is even intending to create relationships because it's providing information. There needs to be a lot more exchange and interaction to form a relationship. Typically, though, we need to step back, I think. New technologies have always created one of two things: fear or hype. That on one hand, people fear that it's going to destroy life and jobs. On the other hand, people think it's going to change the world and business is going to prosper and it's going to be wonderful. And we're actually seeing both of those narratives at the moment. And they are both wrong. If we talk back as far as Aristotle, he stated that he was very concerned about writing because in those days memory was important, and he said writing will destroy memory. It will plant forgetfulness in their souls. And so we have a human history of thousands of years of people fearing new technologies. And part of the reason is they don't understand what the new technologies do. If I can just elaborate for a moment on, say, ChatGPT.
Please.
ChatGPT is an artificial intelligence that has two main functions, and I'm using very simple language here. It has a first function as a search function. It will search the internet and find everything on the topic you put in. The second key function it has, though, which is new, is a generative function. It uses natural language processing and linguistic techniques to bring that information together and to build it into a coherent narrative. That's a very, very clever piece of technology. But going back to that first function, the beginning of that tool is that it only harvests what is already on the web. Now that leads to, and that's important to understand that. It doesn't go and create new information. That's the role of humans. It cannot do what humans do. It can only collect what humans have already written. So, taking that a little bit further, where ChatGPT is very, very useful is if there is a lot of published information on the web that is reliable and accurate, ChatGPT will harvest that and produce good, coherent content. But not everything on the web is accurate. So depending on what you put in, if you put in cardiac surgery and search it, everything written on cardiac surgery is pretty much written by medical doctors. And so ChatGPT will harvest that and it will produce a very good article. Put in the word disinformation and it will harvest all the academic views on disinformation, but it will also harvest trolls and it will produce rubbish because all it can do is harvest what is out there. And so it's good at some things, but it's not good. And so in terms of our workflow, we spent a lot of time doing basic chores like writing a literature review, writing a background summary. Why should a public relations practitioner have to write a background summary? If it's already on the web, let ChatGPT do it. But what about when you want to write a strategy for the future? You need to make recommendations for an organization into the future. It's not published. ChatGPT can't find that. That's where the human comes in. So I don't see, and we need to step back and understand technologies. They're tools. A pencil's a tool. A shovel is a tool. And they only do a certain function. And
would you say, you said just now, step back and understand technology, right? Yes. Is that something like slowing down?
I think we've got to speed up and understand it pretty quickly because it's here. It's here, Tony. It's already here. And I think just the final point I'd say on that is, nuclear fusion is a technology.
Sure.
And it can be used to generate electricity or it can be used to destroy our planet. most technologies, not as dramatic as nuclear fusion, but ChatGPT or any of these technologies can be used for evil, they can be used for good. So what that means for us is we do need to learn to understand how to use technologies, how to use them ethically and carefully for the function they're good at. If we misuse them, we can misuse an axe and cause huge damage with it, and yet we can use an axe or a plane for making beautiful furniture. And so it's how we use these technologies. That's where I think we do need to speed up professionally, still take time as human beings to slow down.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Jim.
Can I interrupt you? It's great to listen to this conversation, but Jim is one of the most important experts of organizational listening. So can you give us your perspective about the current trends in organizational listening during this period of change that is dramatically transforming our profession?
Yes, thank you. And I could speak a long time about organizational listening. The key points that I found is that when you empirically go out and study what we call communication, and there's a lot of investment. I mean, advertising industry is $800 billion a year. Public relations is in excess of $100 billion a year. So these are big industries. I've spent time now in total over the last 9 years inside 60 major organizations, government, corporations, NGOs, even the church, and studying what they do. And when you look at what they do in public communication, it's 80 to 90% distributing information, sometimes as high as 95%. They say they listen, but there's very little listening. So we've somehow, what we said before, we've turned communication into information. We see it as information and forgotten that fundamentally to communication is two-way exchange. And so organizations are losing trust, organizations' relationships are breaking down, customer churn, and these are often related to listening. Now, what we tend to do is assume that the techniques of interpersonal listening can be applied. And the principles can. We want to listen empathetically, listen openly, but organizations have three challenges that I've identified in research. Yes, we'd love the CEO and the managers to listen to the people they meet, but how many people can you listen to face-to-face physically in an organization? Relatively small number. Their organizations have to operate at scale. I work with organizations that have hundreds of thousands of employees, millions of customers. Governments need to communicate with millions of citizens. So right away, scale means that they can't listen with their ears. They need to listen another way. The second characteristic is organizational listening is delegated. And by that I mean it's delegated to customer relations departments, social media monitoring teams, consult stakeholder engagement teams. So listening occurs all around an organization in different sites, and different people hear different things. So an organization's got to somehow bring all that information together to make sense of it. The third characteristic is that voice of customers and consumers and parishioners and others is mediated. It's not coming verbally in real time. It's in emails, it's in letters, it's in submissions, it's in research reports, it's on social media posts. And so those three characteristics mean that our oral senses of listening, which are well studied, but we're not studying this idea of listening at scale through delegated channels and mediated means. What that leads to is organizations need to have systems and resources and skills for listening at scale. And that could be behavioral insights methods, it could be social listening on social media, it can be textual analysis of submissions and documents, and very often communication departments do not have those skills or those resources. So I talk about, and I said in my speech here in Rome, that organizations in the name of communication create an architecture of speaking. And we need to have an architecture of listening. We need physical tools, systems and skills to do it.
Yeah, thanks.
Wonderful.
Do you have any example of good listening that you have studied around the world? Good cases, success story that can be useful for our colleagues?
I'll give you a case study, a real example that's both good and bad. when I was working in part of the listening project, I was working and living in the UK in 2016. And of course, that was the famous year of the EU referendum. When I arrived in the UK, and I was working not for but with government, I discovered that the largest public consultation that's done is the National Health Service, NHS. Every 2 years has a very large public consultation. People are invited to make submissions. And in 2015, the year before, I discovered that they had received 124,700 submissions. Many of these were 10 and 12 pages. We're talking 1 million to 1.5 million words. So that is the voice of people, the voice of doctors, the voice of patients, the voice of nurses. You would think the National Health Service and the Health Department would be very interested, but they had no tools. You can't read 124,700 submissions, so they didn't. They pulled out a few randomly, wrote a summary and gave it to the minister. And it wasn't their fault. They didn't have the tools, didn't have the technologies or the skills. Part of my research project, we brought in machine learning software, NLP programming. We analysed 124,700 submissions. And by doing that using machine learning text analysis, we identified 7 major findings, but I'll just share the major finding. The biggest, the most prominent finding was that people believe that the National Health Service of the UK was being eroded by EU migrants. That was untrue.
By
EU migrants.
European Union migrants. Examples of people from Eastern Europe going to the UK to take advantage of their free health service. It was untrue. Tabloid newspapers had found 1 or 2 cases, but when I spoke to the NHS, they said they make a profit from medical tourism. So so what that summarised is it was anti-EU feeling, very, very prominent. Imagine if the government had done that listening and received that in 2015. They never ever would have had the EU referendum.
Absolutely.
They were unaware of the depth of anti-EU feeling in the UK, mainly among misinformed people. With good listening, they would have identified the misunderstanding and had a campaign to educate people that would have addressed the problem.
Great example of potential use of organizational listening. That we have to focus also on emotion, because the main topic of Inspiring PR, that is the main event of RP coming in these days, is about emotions and communication. Can you both give us your perspective on emotion and communication?
Well, I think we speaking with Jim, we talked about this already, but between us, and emotion is one aspect of listening. But I would like you to elaborate on this. You're the expert.
Yeah, thanks, Tony. We've learned through marketing, with brands, for example, and we've learned through behavioural insights that emotion is a very important part of communication. It's not the only part. We would like people to make decisions based on rational thinking, cognition, in many cases. But we cannot ignore emotion, and this is something that behavioural insights, which is now widely practiced, comes out of behavioural economics. Why did it come out of behavioural economics? It came out because economists started to realise that economic factors were not the only reason people made decisions. Even when you offer people discounts or financial incentives, they often purchased a product that was more expensive. Why? Because they had an emotional connection to a brand, for example. So it was the discovery by economists, who are very rational, that rational thinking does not always work, that people make decisions sometimes on rational grounds, sometimes on emotion. And so it's a careful, we can overuse emotions, we can use them to manipulate people. That's not what we should be doing. But in all of our campaigns and our objectives, we've got to think about, and what behavioural insights is very good at doing, is finding out whether people are making the decisions emotionally or are they making them rationally. If they're making them too emotionally, we might want to encourage more rational thinking, but in many cases we may want to tap into emotions. People are nationalistic, people are proud, people like to feel well dressed, and so whatever it is, in the case of COVID-19, yes, we can promote rational thinking of why on scientific grounds you should be vaccinated, but the emotion of protecting your family is a very important emotion. And in many cases, we can convince people better by just saying protect your family than trying to talk about the scientific evidence.
Thank you, Jim.
Okay.
Thank you, Toni.
Thank you.
We talked about artificial intelligence, the distinction about communication, information, relationship, public relation and communication, artificial intelligence and listening.
And not slowing down.
Thank you very much. Stay tuned. Ferpi Lab is going to publish this content, and not only in the next weeks and months.